When I was a little girl, my father took the newspaper from my hand, and I was told, "Girls don't read important things. That's for your father to read." And so I learned to hide behind the couch in order to read the newspaper in peace. When I was a young girl, I found a book. It was called The Lost Books of the Bible. And I was told, girls don't read things like this. Girls cannot understand these matters. Girls must not question the Holy Bible. And so I learned to hide books in an old box under my bed. When I was a young girl, I was taken out of school. And I was told girls do not study. Girls don't go to college. Girls don't need knowledge. And I learned that a flashlight hidden under the bed covers could illumine the books that would take me on a voyage of discovery. When my daughters grew into young girls, we read books together, we studied together, and they did not have to hide their books from me. But we did read by flashlight under the bed covers, just because it was fun. I learned that I could not teach them what I had not been able to teach myself, and I knew that we needed help. When my daughters were young women, I found Unitarian Universalism. And we were told women are strong. Women can do many things. Strong people can work together in respect. And I learned more than this grateful heart can ever tell. I'm here this morning to tell you a Unitarian Universalist salvation story. Universalist minister Hosea Ballou said this: to be saved is to be happified. Happiness always was and always will be the grand object of all rational beings. It is also to recognize that God is merciful, loving, and compassionate. To realize this is to break from the alienation and separation due to our carnal-minded creation of a fearful and vengeful God. This is a statement that sadly won't be expressed in very many churches across America this morning. I'm so grateful that we have an association that allows us the freedom to explore all beliefs and ideas. Yet I was not always a possessor of that kind of freedom. This morning I'd like to share with you a newcomer's perspective of the life-changing difference it makes when one chooses to be a Unitarian Universalist. If you would, come back in time with me to the year 1974. Gasoline was 55 cents a gallon. The average cost of a new car was about $3,700. That year, President Nixon resigned. Pocket calculators were first sold, and one of the great highlights of that year, Blazing Saddles, came out at the movies. My parents made a life-changing decision that year, and I was only 11 years old. I had been born the fifth of 8 children. My mother and father were Lutherans, as all Scandinavian Minnesotans seem to be. I was the first of the children to be born in Anaheim, just a short drive from Disneyland. I could swim by the time I was 4. I was reading 5th grade books by the time I was 6. I excelled at softball, and I once braved the biggest hill in town on my little bike, trying to impress my brothers. I didn't make it to the bottom of the hill on the bike. As my parents moved from Minnesota to California, they began to attend different churches in an attempt to find a God that would speak to them, a God that would heal them when they were sick, a God who guided their lives and did the miracles spoken of in the New Testament. And in this search, my parents began to attend a very fundamentalist Christian church. As I began to understand what would be required of me as a woman, I began to despair. Let me give you one small example of the different doctrines this church held. You know the story of Adam and Eve in the garden. The book of Genesis says that the serpent in the garden was the most beautiful of all the creatures. He could walk and talk before the fall came, when he was cursed to always crawl upon his belly. Even the serpent spoke together, and he offered to her the fruit of the garden. My former church taught that Cain was the child of Eve and the serpent, and that Abel, his brother, was the child of Eve and Adam. You've heard the common saying, "You are the fruit of your mother's womb." This kind of teaching is also found in the writings of the Kabbalah. Now, this may be an interesting twist on the Genesis story, but my church took very terrible lessons from it. Women were thought to be weak-minded and, like Eve, easily deceived. Women were not to be trusted around men. This church taught that for a woman to be saved was by obeying her husband, by remaining in silence, and by bearing children. The only word that women were allowed to say inside the sanctuary was the word amen, which essentially meant we had to be in agreement with whatever was preached. We were not allowed to vote, to hold a job outside the home. We're not allowed to be educated. Women were to be restricted to keep from enticing men. So pants, makeup, and earrings were forbidden. Our dresses had to be long and baggy. Even the size and shape of our shoe heels was restricted. The end result was that by the time I was 13, I looked like Laura Ingalls from Little House on the Prairie. As I struggled with these rules and restrictions, I remember rebelling and telling my brothers this was all nonsense. But after finishing the 9th grade, I was taken out of school. And from that time on, I was not allowed to spend time with people outside the church. Education, knowledge, and science were considered of the devil. I began to hide books in order to continue my education. I was so hungry for knowledge, it was painful. My greatest joy was to sneak books home from the library before anyone inspected them. I was careful to leave books that were approved lying around the house, but under my bed were the forbidden books on science, archaeology, religious history, and the great classics which fed my soul. At the age of 16, I finally began to feel worn down from secretly disagreeing with this religion. I'd not been around worldly people for years, and I was the only person I knew who even wanted to study or who was curious about everything in life. I began to wonder if my love of education and knowledge was exactly what was keeping me from the God of my parents. At a revival one summer, I knelt at the altar and I gave to God my secret hoard of books, my writing, and my desire for an education. I went home and cried myself to sleep. It was like cutting off a part of my heart. I think it lasted for 6 weeks before I began reading again. I just could not stop. And I did not know then that it was one of the things that would eventually save me. Our church had very strict dating rules. I was 22 before I went on my first date with a young man that my parents approved of. Getting to know each other happened mostly at church gatherings. He was the only young man I ever dated. And on the morning of my wedding, in front of 300 people, I received the first kiss of my life, which is very nerve-wracking. We were blessed with 3 little girls who have been the joys of my life. We had a strong friendship, and we looked like the perfect family. But we were struggling because my husband was gay. Preachers told me to serve my husband as I would serve the Lord, to obey him in everything. They told me to be the perfect wife, to keep the house perfectly clean, and to bake him pies, as if that would help. They said that prayer would change him. They told us that unless my husband fit a standard mold, that God's love was not big enough to include our family. They said that a wife was bound to her husband for as long as he lived. Yet for the man, divorce was allowed if the woman so much as trimmed her hair or refused to give him another child, no matter how many they had. I felt utterly trapped. His father was a minister within this tradition, and to even speak to my family or his family would have meant his rejection. I decided to work on our marriage and wait for an answer. You may ask, why would a woman ever remain in a church like that? The truth is, without an education, without job experience, without a bank account, a credit card, a credit score, I felt utterly helpless. I had 3 little girls to worry about. Without any way to support them, how could I leave? I think my greatest pain was watching my husband trying so devoutly to change what he was born to be. To watch his struggle to fit within the narrow box that his church demanded became an impossible task. We spent hours in prayer and fasting. I waited for God to answer. And then I began to wonder if what my husband struggled with was so horrible, why didn't God change him? To let you know the result of the fasting and prayer, I remember that my sister held her wedding at my house. And after all the guests had gone that night, I heard my 3 little girls laughing hysterically upstairs. And I went to look up, and there in the hallway was my husband dancing in my sister's wedding dress. And I said, I don't think this is working. After much heartache and years of waiting, it began to occur to me that perhaps being gay was not the sinful, abhorrent thing my church told me that it was. Surely, God would have answered the prayers of a sincere heart. As my doubts intensified, I was struggling to educate my daughters at home. My husband and I wanted freedom for our girls to go to college, freedom to divorce and yet stay friends for our daughter's sake. I can say it's one of the hardest things I've ever done, but in 2001, I left my church. In doing so, I lost my extended family. My brothers and sisters asked me to keep my daughters from their father, to demand that he return to our church and to our marriage by withholding visitation. My church tried to tell me when love had to end between a father and his children. They tried to tell me that divorce had to end friendship, that a gay father could not be a good father. I could not comply with any of this, and the relationship I had with my brothers and sisters was strained almost beyond repair. I was left without a single friend. I didn't know anyone outside of our church. I needed help for the transition to put my girls into public school. I wanted to find a church that was kinder to women, a church that would allow me to search for my own truth, no matter where it led me. My daughters and I visited many places, often hearing on my first visit statements bashing gay people or telling a woman what her place was. I didn't want anyone telling my daughters that their father was a horrible person just because he was gay. After our divorce, my former husband found a partner, and I knew I might meet him someday. I wondered if I would feel funny or uncomfortable. But the moment I met him, we became friends. He knew that my daughters and I were searching for a church home, and he came to me with an advertisement out of the local newspaper. He said, "Gracia, I know you've tried a lot of churches." He said, "But if you go to this one, I promise to go with you." So on my first visit to Unitarian Universalist Church, my 3 daughters and I were escorted by their father and 5 gay men. I was a little bit worried, actually. The service coordinator that Sunday was a woman, and I was like, oh my, they have a woman on the platform. And she welcomed everyone regardless of race or religion, whether you were rich or poor, gay or straight. And at that, my eyebrows shot up. I looked down the row of gay men beside me, grinning like an idiot, and they were grinning back at me. I knew right away that I was home. I came into the church bruised and frightened, shunned by my family, a little scared of the challenge to fit into society, the challenge to support my daughters as a single mother. I have been so thankful we found a home within this faith. Many scholars agree that the person you will become in 5 years has largely to do with the books that you read and the people with whom you surround yourself with. In those 5 years at a UU church, this is what happened. I voted for the first time in a public election, and I told my church friends I'd finally achieved what is the right of every American. My daughters earned a 2nd-degree brown belt in Kung Fu. My youngest daughter set 7 school records in swimming. When my girls graduated from high school and were the first women from either side of the family to attend college, it was at the Unitarian Universalist Church that we celebrated those achievements. When my girl's father wanted to attend the services, he did so without worry and was able to sit with us and feel comfortable and welcomed by the congregation. In the first year, I joined 2 committees. After 3 years, I joined the Board of Trustees. The 4th year, I joined the board of the Southeast District. And in 2009, I took my 9th grade formal education and my lifetime of secret study. And I was accepted into Star King School for the Ministry in the Masters of Divinity program. These kinds of achievements are what is possible in a liberal faith environment. The Unitarian Universalist Church has given me a voice. If you ever feel tired of committee meetings or choir practice or setting up Sunday morning, if you have worked for years spreading the news of Unitarian Universalism, please remember what your faith has done for my family. Remember, there are hundreds of people with stories similar to mine. Thousands of people who don't fit into standard churches. There are young gay and lesbian people in churches across America this morning being told they're just not good enough, that the desires of their hearts are forbidden, that God does not accept them as they are. They're being told that God's love is too small to welcome them. There are still today tens of thousands of women and children being denied an education because of religious reasons. There are people like the young Hosea Ballou who want to ask questions but are trapped because they cannot. My former church outnumbers the members in the UUA by 5 times, just in America alone. Our faith needs to shine like a beacon of hope to those who need to be told that true religion values them as they are and values their freedom of thought. Will you keep in mind this morning the thousands who are being kept in bondage under the influence of ministers who frighten their congregations by a vision of what Hosea Ballou called a fearful and vengeful God? Gandhi said, "Truth and love, it is the only thing that counts. Where this is present, everything rights itself in the end. This is a law to which there is no exception." May the message of universalism continue to shine. May we go on as a people of free and loving faith together, celebrating the free mind and the individual search for truth and meaning. May we enter into a contemplative silence.